Where is the CMC? It's not in the showroom. It's not in the hubs. It's not in the crucible. Or the town hall. So where is the CMC?
Hello? Hello? CMC?
Is this on?
Hello? Hello?
Can you see me?
Can you hear me?
Hello?
Right then, quick email before I do a zoom and... Oh, is that my hair? Oh, bollocks.
So, what?
Scooby-Dooby-Doo!
There's the CMC! All your favourites at the Children's Media Conference online from the 6th to the 10th of July. Register now on the CMC website.
Brilliant. Okay then. So, my lovelies, I am Fayon Dixon. I'm the host of my own children's radio show, The Kids Are All Right, and I'm often heard reviewing the news of the day for BBC Radio London and Talk Radio. And I can often be seen doing that and also hosting a variety of events around the country in the world of STEM. Now, it's my job today to welcome you all to this webinar, and I can see that hundreds of you are there. So thank you so much for participating. In a moment, we are going to hear some research insights on what the SVOD platforms are showing and seeking. But first, some housekeeping rules. Just a few notes. So we are going to start with a big thank you, first of all, with the patron sponsors. And they are backing our CMC webinars. They're on screen now. You can see them. Akamar Films, Azumi, BBC Children's, we've got CITV, we've got Daryl McQueen, NBC Universal, the Elf Factory and Zodiac Kids. And of course, we're looking ahead to the next CMC webinar on the 26th of June. Just look out for that. It's a really successful reconfiguration of animation companies to remote working means greater flexibility in work practice in the future, and what the implications of that might be for women in animation workforce for other disadvantaged groups. Now, after that, we are going to have the full package. We are going to go on to the Children's Media Conference 2020 online. Starting on July 2nd, my birthday, I am accepting all kinds of gifts. I'm a size 4.5 shoe and a size 8 in clothes. So with the UK's only international market for kids content, the CMC International Exchange. Then the popular CMC Skill Builder workshop on the 6th of July. Now you need to book early for this one because there are only 60 spaces. Then we're going to have online CMC with a huge range of live webinars and on-demand content. The conference goes on till Friday, the 10th of July. And you can register right now. Why wait? Get on with it. Darren is sharing the address of that in the chat right now. Thank you, Darren. So back to today. Today's event has been produced by myself and exec produced by Tim Patterson from the CMC Advisory Committee. It's all going to be recorded for you in full and uploaded to the CMC YouTube channel by Sunday evening. And that will include our changemaker for today's webinar, who will be played at the end of the event. That will be Abby Kalute, who is a remarkable 12-year-old who has won a Diana Award for her work as founder of Girls into Coding. She'll have something to say about role models and the future of science and technology. So we want all the questions from you, and questions will be taken after the presentations today. The only way to send those questions is by using the Q&A button. And you can see it right here. Please don't send questions using the Zoom email because nobody will be reading those. So they'll be very, very lonely. And after the webinar, you can continue the conversations and ask further questions in the Children's Media Community Facebook group. Dan will post the URL in the chat right now and also at the end. And, you know, think of it as an equivalent to meeting up in a bar over talking about this content. So last time we tried this, Cheryl Taylor insisted on calling it Greg's Bar, but the CMC editorial director, Greg, has asked that because he's teetotal and he has a teetotal upbringing and a lifetime of abstinence, you're right, this time it is simply going to be set up as an event in the Children's Media Conference group, and it's named after this webinar. Everybody's welcome to come. So just drop in, come and see us and post your questions for the speakers, make your comments, etc. And the speakers have said that they will drop by and try to answer as many questions as possible. Okay, well, we are good to go. So joining us today, we have Richard Cooper, Research Director at Ampere Analysis, say that with these teeth. He has nearly 2 decades experience in analysing the film and TV content markets. Rich is an expert in data forecasting and modelling, and has created analysis tools focused on VOD service, including Netflix, Amazon Prime, and recently launched US studio services alongside pay TV tracking and forecasting models for international pay TV providers. Now, you think Richard looks a little bit familiar to you. That's because he's frequently quoted in national, international, and trade press, including The Guardian, Financial Times, Variety, Broadcast, and Screen International. He's also a regular speaker at the UK and international content-related conferences and has had numerous radio and TV appearances. So if you are after Richard's autograph, form an orderly queue. Thank you so much for logging on in, Richard. Can I ask how you and yours are doing? How's everybody? How is everyone?
We're okay at the moment, yes. Everything's been going fairly well. Nothing untoward to report, and that's the important thing right now.
And that is the blessing right there. So you have a fantastic presentation for us, so take it away.
Okay. Thank you, Fayon. Yes, I am Richard Cooper. I'm one of the research directors at Ampere Analysis. Now, for those of you who don't know who Ampere Analysis is, we are a research firm entirely focused on the media sector. I'm just going to jump straight in and look at SVOD kids content here in the UK. And we're going to focus on the larger players. So the chart that we're looking at here just shows you the volume of movies and TV shows that are available through the key platforms here in the UK. So I'm just going to address Disney and Apple just for a moment. We've included Apple here as obviously one of the new entrants into the market, but as an aggregator play, Apple TV Plus has very, very little original content of its own. So I think we're going to remove that from any further analysis at this point. Now, because we're talking about kids, we have to talk about Disney, of course. Now, Disney's overall catalogue is relatively small, but there's a very, very high proportion of that catalogue given over to what we're classing as children's content. Now, of course, Disney's branding is very much a sort of family-friendly platform, but actually not all of that content is necessarily just for kids. Now, if we shift our focus once again and have a look at Netflix, Amazon, and Now TV, these are the largest platforms in the SVOD platforms in the UK by catalogue size. Now, within each of them, there is a different volume of children's movies and TV shows that are available, and that's shown in that lower number in the blue at the bottom of each of those bars. However, the one thing that joins all of these together is that, as fully developed services, they have a relatively similar proportion of their catalogue given over to movies and TV content for kids, around sort of the low to mid-teens, typically. Certainly is as of April 2020. Now, if we look at that proportion over a longer time period, we can see that particularly for Netflix and Amazon, there's a very consistent aggregate proportion of their catalogues accounted for by kids' movies and TV shows, around 11% on a quarterly basis. We do see some increases, though, over that time from the likes of Now TV. Because their catalogue is, by and large, a little bit smaller, this, on aggregate, is an increase of around sort of 50 to 60 titles over that 5-quarter time period. Now, that's a lot of consistency, and actually we see that echoed when we drill down into those kids' catalogues. So when we're looking particularly at Amazon here, we can see that the proportion of kids' titles accounted for by TV shows is pretty much flat over that period. We see a little bit of growth from Netflix in terms of the sort of proportion of TV shows within their catalogue. And similarly, we see a slight decline from Now TV as the number of children's movies start to increase. Now, just to talk about Disney here as well, actually only 17% of their kids' content on the service is actually TV shows. And this really does give an indication of the proportion and importance of those movies that Disney is particularly well known for. Now, for the SVOD service, it's incredibly important to keep their offerings quite fresh by adding in new titles and obviously dropping older ones as licensing deals come to an end. Now, on the chart that we're looking at here, we can see the newly added titles, kids titles, that have been added to the Netflix service on a quarter-by-quarter basis over the last 5 quarters. Now, something to focus on within this particular chart is Q4 2019, when we see a particular spike in the number of newly added titles to that service. Now, those are marked there in the blue bars, and then underneath we see the number of removed titles in the orange. But in Q4 2019, there's a particularly high number of additions. This is very much Netflix attempting to compete with the launch of the Disney Plus service. Now, within this chart, it does look like that's been continued into Q1 2020, but actually, if we look back at Q1 2019, there's a similar volume of titles being added and taken away at this time. So it really is a sort of one-off in Q4 2019. If we now look at Amazon, again, we do see quite a peak when it comes to the Q4 of 2019. However, the main reason for showing this chart in this way is really to highlight the fact that the numbers of additions are far higher for Amazon than they are for any of the other services. And indeed, they tend very much on a quarter-by-quarter basis to outweigh those that have been removed from the service. This is indicative of the way Amazon curate their catalogue. There's very few titles comparatively being removed. They use these additions to grow their catalogue between about sort of 5 to 10% on an annual basis. So not only is it the largest catalogue in the market, it's also the fastest, one of the fastest growing in terms of the number of titles as well. Now, if I move to Now TV, what we see here is a much more heavily curated catalogue, almost a sort of one title in, one title out kind of effect. The only real exceptions there are in Q4 of 2019, where again, we see a real huge number of additions to the service as a result of the Disney Plus launch. That does seem to be carried forward a little bit into Q1 of 2020 as well. So Netflix, as one of the SVOD incumbents, definitely trying to compete more readily with that sort of family, for that family audience with Disney Plus. Now, of course, we do need to talk about sort of recent additions as a result of the COVID-19 pandemic. The chart that we're looking at here compares in the blue Q1 of 2020, so that's 3 months worth of additions to each of these services, compared to the number of TV shows added during the lockdown period. So this is a full month, so it's in fact April of 2020. Now, if we look at Netflix on the left-hand side there, we can see that the number of titles added by Netflix in April of 2020 actually outweighs those added in the previous 3 months. So this actually represents an extra 2.5 months worth of activity in terms of new titles being added to Netflix. Now, in the center there, we can see a similar volume were added in April of 2020 by Amazon. It doesn't quite represent 3 months worth of additions, but certainly an extra month and a half's worth of activity on the part of Amazon. So really responding to that lockdown audience. Now TV, again, it's more titles than we would normally expect to see on a month-to-month basis. But again, it's sort of more an additional 0.5 months worth of activity in terms of those additions. So when we're looking at these additions, it's important to understand where they've come from. So who's providing these new titles? Now, previously we've been concentrating largely on movies and TV shows. I'm just going to drill down now into into TV shows on their own. So when we look at those new additions and where they've come from for Netflix, what we can see is a particular spike in Q3 of 2019. A lot of those titles, or rather the increase in those titles, came from the US majors and from the international distributors. Now, in terms of the US major titles, this was really a swan song of the titles that Netflix had licensing for before they were moved from Netflix onto the studio-led services. Those that came from the international distributors were Netflix trying to build their catalogue of, say, more recognisable children's IP. In Q4 of 2019, we see a dip here in the number of TV shows. Now, this is an indicator, really, that the many of those new additions that were placed onto the service in Q4 of 2019 were predominantly movies, so competing directly with the kind of content that was being made available through Disney Plus. By Q1 2020, however, we see much more of a return to form given the importance of TV shows to Netflix. What we do see, however, is a much greater proportion of those titles being sourced from independent producers and distributors. Now, when we move to look at Amazon, we see quite a different picture. In Q4 of 2019, we actually see a greater level of contribution from the US majors and international distributors. And in fact, that's been carried over into Q1 of 2020. So less reliance, though still accounting for the lion's share for independent producers and distributors. Now, finally, if we look at Now TV, we see a very, very different picture. And this is largely because, of course, they're catering for a domestic UK audience. So a lot of titles coming from international distributors, again, with a heavily curated catalogue. Now TV is much more interested in recognisable children's IP. And quite a contribution from local broadcasters, which in the case of Now TV is likely to be Sky. Now, one of the things that holds the last 3 charts that we've looked at together is really the absence of any contribution from the SVOD platforms themselves. Now, this is really because they have really proved not to be able to develop and launch successful children's IP, it being a slightly different beast to the normal programming that they're used to. So let's have a look at the catalogue makeup for a lot of these SVOD providers. So again, quite a complicated set of charts here, and let me just take a little bit of time to explain this. So on the left-hand side, we've got the persistent catalogue for Netflix, and around that pie chart, you can see the genre, the top-level genre breakdown. A large proportion given over to animation, a little less to comedy, drama, other, and then finally action and adventure at the top. Now, in the centre, we've got what I'm calling pre-lockdown editions. This is the titles that were added through Q1 of 2020. And we can see there's a huge amount of commonality between the pie chart in the center and the one on the left-hand side. And this really is, whilst there's a slightly more animation registering here, this is really indicative of Netflix's investment in their own animation studio, and highly indicative of the kind of additions that they've been making. Now, when we look at the April 2020 titles, so these were the added during lockdown, we actually see an incredibly similar picture. So this is really, despite the huge volume of titles that were added, it does suggest that a lot of these titles were planned as part of the sort of wider catalogue expansion for Netflix. Now, when we change the view to look at Amazon, their persistent catalogue and those that were added in Q1 of 2020, those two pie charts look relatively similar, and certainly in terms of the proportion of animation, a little bit of shift between the live action genres. However, when we look at the additions that were made in April of 2020, so those lockdown titles, we see a large reduction in the proportion accounted for by animated titles. So coming out of lockdown, it's quite likely that Amazon are going to be much more interested in animated titles in order to help redress the balance of their catalogue. Now, moving to Now TV, again, the persistent catalogue and the additions in the first quarter of this year are very, very similar. So again, the left-hand side and the centre. On the right-hand side, however, we see a greater level of contribution from that other category. Now, I understand that's quite ill-defined on these charts, but what's included in there are titles which are focused around music, education, and entertainment. So normally what we would do in order to make an assessment of the potential content gaps would be to look at the commissioning strategies of each of these SVOD providers and then contrast that with their acquisitions. Now, unfortunately, when it comes to commissioned works, these sort of three key SVOD services don't really commission a huge number of shows. In fact, just 44 children's titles were commissioned by these three over the course of 2019 and into 2020. The vast majority of them were Netflix. They were mainly in the US and predominantly animation, as I've said, part of their animation studio strategy. So not a huge amount of interest there. So what we've done instead is change our analysis. So again, quite a complicated chart, so I'm going to do a little bit of explanation here. What we've used is all of the genre tags that Netflix use to describe the content that they are adding to their service. So one title might be tagged with, say, tween, nature and animals, and have it as having a female protagonist. So within the chart on the left-hand side, that one title will appear 3 times, but they are ranked in terms of the order of importance of those tags to Netflix. Now, the analysis that we can do around this leads to the graphic on the right-hand side of this page. And what we've done is we're using this as an indicator of the level of interest Netflix is likely to have in acquiring titles, which they can apply those tags to. The larger the negative number, the less likely it is that Netflix are going to be interested, because they already feel that within their catalogue, they have good representation of those tags. So if you've got a preschool title featuring a female protagonist, it's unlikely that Netflix will be interested in that title because they have a lot of those already. That's what those big negative numbers mean. But towards the bottom of that chart, we can see some positive numbers as well. So if you have a mystery title based on a comic book, it's quite likely that Netflix is going to be more interested in that type of title as we emerge from lockdown. If we shift to Amazon, we can recall that actually they did not make as many editions as Netflix, and therefore are going to be overall more interested in acquiring titles as we emerge from lockdown. And in fact, what we can see quite clearly there is that there's a very sort of positive set of numbers for, say, a crime and thriller show with an element of mystery, say, based on a children's classic. Now, as we learned from one of those earlier slides, if that show is also animated, it's very likely that Amazon are going to be interested in that kind of program. Just moving to Now TV, again, fewer editions in that critical April 2020 period, so a lot more interested in titles overall. But what we can say from this is if you have a superhero title featuring a tween protagonist, which has a strong element of mystery and is a sitcom, I would definitely go to Now TV with that particular title. And on that note, I'm going to end the presentation and we'll move to take questions.
Thank you, Richard. Brilliant stuff. Real great. We have for you, so let's get onto those straight away. So from Shabnam Reze, he says your data shows what is on the platform. There is a lag time between green lighting and launch. How do you account for that in your chart of volume titles added?
So in terms of those are titles which have been added in that month. So anything that's greenlit will not be included within there. One of the charts that we missed out on, in fact, were some of looking at the originals, the children's originals that have been sort of greenlit by those major SVOD services. And one of the points that I was going to make on it is that it's particularly dull. There's actually relatively few titles in there. Most of them are Netflix. Most of them have been commissioned in the US, and the vast majority of them are animation, which really does reflect Netflix's investment in a animation studio.
Thank you, Richard. And I hope that question was answered for you, Shabnam. We have a question from Bella Thompson. Bella says, we are developing an online animated series for the tween age group. Is there any popular episode length for this age range? We are aiming for 2 minutes at the moment. And that is Bella Tomlin, producer at Kino Bino Animation Studio.
So duration is one of the areas that we look at. It's not something that I've looked at specifically for this as part of this research, but it is certainly something that we can look into. Yes, we can in fact compare that sort of on a global basis against all of the sort of VOD providers in market. But yeah, I'm not able to answer that directly off the top of my head. Sorry.
Okay. All right. Thank you. From Fernanda Camargo. Hi, I'm an aspiring producer of kids and family content, currently getting my master's in Boston University. Seeing how much services like Netflix are invested in animation, would you predict this trend will continue, or could live action see a resurgence?
So one of the reasons that the international SVODs particularly are interested in animation is that it ports over borders incredibly well. So they are very much looking for content which is going to be, they're going to be able to show in as many countries globally as is possible. Now, animation fails that incredibly well, much more so than live action, which tends to be very much focused on sort of current language and current cultural expressions. So I think one of the key things here is, rather than approaching say some of those international players with live action content, you would be sort of better served perhaps to look at some of the sort of more nationally focused services, not just SVOD but also ad supported services, and of course broadcaster VOD as well.
We have a question from Oliver Kendall. Education doesn't seem to be covered within the analysis. Do you have any figures on how education has integrated into the sectors you have looked at within the big players?
So within the big players, you know, we do see some education titles as specific tags for the big three that we looked at there, they don't feature as often as they would, say, for some of the broadcast players. It really is sort of dependent on those, the types of titles and that they're known for. Education isn't one of those areas that Netflix has particularly looked at. If we actually look at the 4 titles that we see from Apple TV, for example, they are all tagged as education titles. So it really does depend on where they see themselves within that sort of educational sphere as to how and where they tag these shows.
Fantastic, thank you. Ed Kendall wants to know, given the situation with remote learning, do you see any SVOD providers currently acquiring educational content or tagging their content as educational?
So again, not tagging their content particularly as educational. And of the 3 that we were looking at there, only one of them has commissioned a sort of COVID-19 sort of generated title, and that was Netflix. Unfortunately, the title escapes me. However, they don't see it as their remit necessarily to educate in the same way that the national broadcasters do.
Jonathan Clark, thank you. Jonathan Clark wants to know, is the data based on global SVOD figures or UK?
So that was entirely based on the UK. So obviously for the international players, they do have what we refer to as international catalogue and also local catalogue, depending on where you are in the world. So it would have to be a specific country dive in order to do that similar analysis elsewhere. But it is we have that data.
And Alex Washington just asks, what do you qualify or classify as team projects?
As team projects. So one of the things with the genre tags that we looked at there is that unlike the genres that we assign when we're doing this analysis normally, we've used those genre tags. So this is how Netflix or Amazon or Now TV define team. So this is how they're describing their own content. So it's their language rather than ours. So I can't answer exactly how they define that, but it will be specific to those individual providers.
Thank you. Lindsay Watson has a couple of questions here. So it's, first of all, excellent information, and I agree. Thanks for sharing. For animation specifically, what do you think is the biggest opportunity for British animation producers with original IP? And also, do you have any data on the diversity of producers pitching the programmes?
So we have no data on the diversity of producers. So our focus is entirely on the content itself. And in terms of original IP, one of the things that we've seen, particularly with Netflix, but also with Now TV, is they are very keen to license sort of recognized IP. They have a persistent history of being wholly unable to develop their own kids' content and to sort of develop sort of those as franchises. So they've gone out, and certainly over the course of the last 18 months, really focused on sort of third-party IP. Now, there are other opportunities for original IP. I think some of the later presentations will actually touch on sort of AVOD and BVOD in a little bit more detail. And I think for original IP and certainly proving the value of that IP, those are possibly a more realistic avenue.
Thank you, Richard. We've still got loads of questions for you, but I'm very aware of the time. So I just want to say for Wazir, Alice and Brendan, we do have the Facebook chat that's going to be happening afterwards. So I hope you can join us for that, and we'll see if Richard can answer your questions then. Thank you so much, Richard. That was brilliant. Yeah, thank you. So we are now going to move on to Jay. Jay's been waiting in the wings. Jay Mills is a research director from Kids Knows Best, been there since March 2020, and is continuing his work in a rapidly evolving children's or kids space media. He is focused on developing innovative services and research tools to support brands, reach and engagement with family audiences. Now, before he moved agency side, Jay spent 8 years providing in-house research for the likes of Time Warner, Walt Disney Company, Discovery Networks, and National Geographic. Welcome, Jay. How you doing?
I'm doing well, thank you. Thank you for having me.
Yeah, it's great to have you here. We also have your colleague, Peter Robinson, who'll be jumping into the Q&A after your presentation. And I'd just like to mention that Peter is an experienced consultant working in kids media for over a decade now. He specialises in new technology, kids entertainment, ethical marketing to kids and education, and where possible, screwing all those things together. He is an observer of children's habits. Peter's day-to-day role includes listening to and observing how young people and families engage with traditional and digital media to advise product owners and developers, creatives, and distributors support some of the world's leading brands. And in this latest role at Kids Knows Best, Peter is developing products that give young people a forum to influence the world that they live in and the media they engage with. So great to have you here, Peter. We'll be hearing from you later. So thank you for your patience, Jay. Over to you.
Thank you for your introduction. So my name is Jay, and as Fayon said, I am the Research Director at Kids Know Best. For those of you that don't know, Kids Know Best is a creative agency specialising in kids and families, informed by real-time data and insights. What I'm going to talk to you today about, though, is our latest version of NetFiles. So I think let's jump straight into it. Let's go to the methodology slide. Sure. So as a background, we launched NetFiles last year as a way of profiling how kids consume content on Netflix, focusing on over 200 shows and movies on Netflix. The study was conducted in the US and the UK with over 4,000 children and parents under the age of 16. We wasn't surprised to see how much the big brands dominated Netflix viewing, but we were encouraged to see the emergence of many digital-first brands, such as Little Baby Bum, and exclusive content such as the NBC Universal stable of content performing very well. This year, we've updated the study. Assisted by time spent in the last few weeks consulting with brands to further enhance it, we are including all major SVOD services and some AVOD platforms such as YouTube. We're also conducting remote in-home immersions with some families across the UK. This research was out of field 2 days ago, so it's been a crazy couple of days trying to prepare this early insight for you guys, but it does mean it is hot off the press. So thanks to CMC for your patience in letting us leave it so late to get it all together. Really appreciate it. So if we go to the next slide. So these are the questions we asked, but in the interest of time, I think we'll skip through the questions because I think it'd be more interesting to talk findings than questions. So if we move to the next slide. So the first finding I want to show you now is a big one, I think. Almost 9 in 10 parents say children influence their decision to retain an SVOD service. So historically, video on demand services focus was on providing entertainment for adults. Children's content was a sort of afterthought, like an added bonus. I know from firsthand from my time working for kids broadcasters that linear television is in decline. And one of the major contributors to this is, of course, more viewing to OTT services. So with viewing shifting that way, it's only natural that children are going to begin to make that transition and in many ways begun leading that transition. So to have 9 out of 10 parents consider their children to be important in making the decisions around what SVOD subscriptions to subscribe to, that's sort of, for me, validates the need for this sort of study. If they're because they're this important, we need to understand what the world of SVOD means to them. Next up, we have a video. So what we did was we asked children to get in touch with us, tell us how they felt about their favorite SVOD services. This is what they had to say.
Mainly Netflix and Disney Plus because they're my favourite.
Disney Plus. Disney Plus. Netflix. I watch Disney Plus and Netflix.
I've been recently watching Netflix.
A few times a week. We always watch when we're eating. Every day if I can squeeze it in.
Every day for a week and then I'll take a break.
The Chromebook, so the computer and the TV.
My tablet. I watch on the TV. Mummy, you know when I suddenly disappear with my iPad?
Before quarantine, I watched loads of movies with my friends.
I like to watch it by myself.
You and Dada. I just watch them on my own.
I've rewatched Stranger Things, of course.
Hannah Montana, Sweet Life of Zack and Cody, SpongeBob episode,
Loads of Marvel movies.
I like Avatar more than any show in the world.
Lovely. So I'll just take you now through the children's subscription landscape. Yeah. So, I mean, it will come to as no surprise to anyone to see Netflix comfortably number one with a presence in 4 out of 5 UK homes with children. However, what might come as a bit of a surprise is to see Disney Plus already a quite comfortable 3rd place, seeing itself in over 2 out of 5 households and really closing in on Prime Video at number 2. We've also got up on the slide here, we're looking at used to use. So Netflix also manages the lowest used to use percentage, meaning that not that many people who have subscribed have gone on to leave. And Disney Plus actually have the 2nd best used to use percentage, with just 12% of the population no longer using it, which a portion of that can probably be attributed to the end of free trials. But what will be interesting in the next iteration of this study would be to see if Disney Plus can maintain a low used to use percentage as the population slowly starts to resume normal life. And finally, on that same metric, Apple TV and Now TV are actually the only services that have had more people leave than currently subscribe, which is not good for either. Next slide, please. And I mean, I mentioned earlier, we've had discussions with a lot of people in the lead up to this study, and many called out YouTube as a really key component to consider in all of this. So whilst it clearly makes up in this slide here, it clearly makes up a significant percentage of UK household, but it does still trail Netflix, which is interesting. I mean, a lot of people might think YouTube would be a stronger pull in Netflix in households with children, but Netflix still holds firm. Next slide, please. So here we're looking at more specifically what services are available in the household that children are using. And this is where Disney Plus really makes some noise. It overtakes Prime Video and YouTube to sit almost level with Netflix. Now this to me, I mean, and including with what we saw in Richard's slides, proves that putting real concerted effort as well as a decent amount of money into providing high quality kids content does not go unnoticed by children. If you're putting an effort and focus onto kids content, you'll see the results that you've seen here. YouTube, somewhat surprisingly, falling down in the rank. My guess for that would be that despite the fact they do all they can to safeguard children from age inappropriate content, parents will still consider the brands like Netflix, and especially like a heritage brand like Disney Plus, as a more trustworthy source of content. Next slide, please. So here we're looking at favorite SVOD services ranked. Again, it won't come as too much of a surprise to see Netflix dominating the favorite services. This is against the population sample as well. So it having the most subscribers will lend it to being top of this rank, but it also does have a lot of affinity from those that subscribe. Prime Video finds itself in at number 2, but Disney Plus is not too far behind it, which, considering it has quite a lot less subscribers, is significant. So you'll see from the slide that follows now that when you consider only homes that have access to the services in question, Disney Plus actually outperforms Prime Video for favorite service, which is pretty strong for a brand new service. Can we have the next slide, please? So this is simply the average months that a subscriber to each of these services subscribe for. Naturally, Disney Plus has only been in for a few months, so it's not much of an insight there, but seeing it here is real, brings to light what a powerhouse Netflix is. It was the first on the scene, and they've been able to develop trust, loyalty, affinity, and as a result, they've got over 2 years of service out of the people who subscribe. But Disney Plus, of course, will also benefit from being a trusted and well-loved brand. But as an SVOD platform, it's very much in its infancy, so it's been a real strong start for it to be well within the mix so early. Next slide. And I guess the main takeaways from that section is that Disney Plus mean business. They've made a real splash in the world of SVOD, with children in particular, and the data suggests that that isn't going to change anytime soon, looking at retention, intention. 2, Prime Video has already fallen to third choice with children subscribed to Disney Plus. So I think the ease at which, Prime Video remains a prominent player in the wider SVOD landscape, but the ease at which Disney Plus has leapfrogged them in the eyes of children is surely is a cause for concern, considering also how important we found children to be in the decision-making behind choosing services. And 3, we sort of knew it already, but Netflix is king. They'll have an eye on Disney Plus and the massive early impact that they've made, but they have years of satisfied video on demand fan base to keep them comfortable for the time being. So there's data in the study that I've not shown, but Netflix does have the highest retention intention of all the services surveyed. So they'll take some beating for a while to come yet. Next slide, please. So how are kids consuming data right now? So we didn't want to make this viewing in a pandemic study, but it would have been silly for us to have the opportunity to ask kids how they're viewing in this moment in time. So what we did was we asked them how much time they usually spend streaming video on demand content, and then we asked them how much they're spending since quarantine, and the numbers are as big as you'd imagine. So obviously, of course, we know they're spending more time gaming, reading, playing with siblings, home learning, but just isolating video on demand services, we can see how important they've been during lockdown at providing entertainment to children, with nearly an hour extra each day consumed in the UK, up from 11 hours to 17 hours a week. Interestingly, this has impacted preschoolers the least, probably because they're already at home anyway. But you can see with teenagers, they're now spending almost 3 hours a day on video on demand services, up from 2 hours a day. Binge watching shows like Stranger Things, as we saw there in the video. Next slide, please. So we're going to have a little look at what the top shows are for kids on SVOD. These top shows here are based on those surveyed as currently watching. And it's a unique set of data because, as we know, whilst Netflix are notoriously difficult at sharing data, even when they do, it's at a user level. What we're able to do here is break down shows and profile them by the demographics with which they target. It might not be a surprise to see the top two here. So Paw Patrol and Peppa Pig leading the charge amongst preschoolers. It becomes even less surprising at the top of the SVOD standards when you realise that they're on 3 SVOD services. They air on Netflix, Prime Video, and Now TV, as well as the significant airtime that they get on their linear channels. So it's a high level of exposure that drives most of this top 10, including the 2 little baby bum shows, which are also air on the same services as the top 2, as well as having a huge existing fan base on YouTube. So only 3 brands in the top 10 air on just one platform, and they all benefit from an existing fan base, either from free-to-air linear viewing or being a heritage brand in the case of Mickey Mouse. Next slide, please. So there isn't too much difference in the viewing habits of 4 to 7s as there is in the viewing habits to 0 to 3s. Peppa Pig and Paw Patrol still remain dominant. The number of brands that are on just one service remains at 3, so it's evident here that maximum exposure still remains effective with this age group. Next slide, please. So 8 to 11 is where we begin to see a little bit of a departure from the viewing behaviours of the preschool kids. We get the introduction of some live action content. Animation still dominates the top 5 with just Disney Plus's Jessie breaking the top 5 here. But interestingly, the number of brands on only one service jumps to 7. So this shows that kids are starting to look for the content that they want to watch instead of having it mass exposed to them. Although the top rated show amongst this age group is Horrid Henry, which airs on Netflix, Prime, and Now TV. So that exposure still certainly rings true with them. Next slide, please. And then when we get to the 12 plus, we can see the transition from animation to live action complete. So The Simpsons is the only one that sort of still performs well, and you'd expect it to. What's interesting here, though, is not only is there only one brand that's across more than one service, we're seeing the introduction of SVOD original content here too, which shows that as kids get older, it's the content that starts driving decision-making with destination shows. So you don't need to spoon-feed children. The older they get, they will go and find their own content wherever they want it. And they'll know where that content is also. Next slide, please. So now we can have a little look, a little brand focus. So we are going to show you, next slide, please. So this is a little insight into Little Baby Bum. I mentioned earlier speaking that we had, this data has just come in 2 days ago. There's a lot more within the data tables that we would like to have pulled out, but we simply couldn't get the data in time. So ordinarily this focus would be a lot more in detail, but there's a lot of interest in here too. One of the things is that Little Baby Bum is a majority co-view show, with siblings, family viewing accounting 50% of view time, although 42% watching alone suggests the series acts as a babysitter also to kids of this age. It also inspires much regular viewing, so you'll see there 90% of those watching it are watching it at least once a week. And for a show with little to no linear presence, it has pretty good purchase levels. Almost a quarter of viewers that have watched Little Baby Bum on SVOD have also purchased a toy. It's also worth noting that there's desire amongst those watching Little Baby Bum for a book also. Next slide, please. So on to Peppa Pig now, airing to a not too dissimilar audience. But if you look at the CP activations on the right there, you can see that they have a huge presence in the CP arena. So 57% of those that have seen Peppa Pig on SVOD have purchased a toy. You can see amongst kids 0 to 3 that everyone who watches frequently, and also co-viewing, quite a similar story. Although there's a little bit more watching with friends, I think that increases slightly the older we get. And on to slide 26. And the most popular show with 12 to 16s is Stranger Things. So interestingly, these sorts of shows inspire slightly less frequent viewing as they're binge shows. So it's difficult to really maintain any regular kind of viewing when you've completed it within a week. But interestingly, in terms of CP, the standout item is clothing. So it's the older kids get, naturally, they show less of an interest in toys. And then it's clothing, which becomes a way for children to express their fandom of a show. Next slide, please. And takeaways. Video on demand has become an even more valuable source of entertainment for children during this pandemic, providing children with enough content to keep them engaged for an extra hour a day in the UK, with kids 12 to plus now spending upwards of 3 hours a day watching video on demand services. Number 2, mass exposure is the key to preschool engagement. Looking at what children were watching on SVOD, it was really interesting to see the drivers behind their choices, with preschoolers seemingly needing their content served on a plate for them. They don't get sick of seeing the same content everywhere they look. So if you want to attract your young kids to your brand, they need to see it everywhere they turn. And finally, from me, exposure becomes less of a necessity as children grow older. They understand the SVOD world as well, if not better than anyone else, and they don't need to be spoon-fed their content. This was evident in the amount of exclusive content that 12 plus kids enjoyed, including a number of Netflix originals. If older kids want to watch something they like, they'll find it. And that's everything from me. I'd like to thank everyone for their time and introduce Kids Know Best COO Pete Robinson now, who will talk about the future, what's next, and then we'll stick around to answer any questions. So thank you very much. Pete.
Thanks, Jay. I think we can move on to the next slide, or probably the next 2 slides. Yeah, this one's perfect, thank you. So the scene from Jay's data, Disney Plus has made a pretty sizable splash already, even here in the UK. We also have done the study in the US, and in the US it's been around for a little longer. You can see the more mature impact it's had in that market. But what we've not seen yet is an impact on people unsubscribing from Netflix or Prime or those other subscription services that, as Jay said, you know, people have been subscribed to for years. We don't know yet if new SVOD subscribers, although there's probably not that many of them left, are choosing Disney Plus over other suppliers as their first entry into the subscription video market. But what we do know is that Disney Plus, as we saw from those children talking to us, are taking a good chunk of kids' lives' time on video consumption. But as the inevitable period of some sort of austerity hits over the next period of time, we are seeing families start to talk about value-based decisions. So those services that are gathering dust will begin to experience attrition. And as Jay said, you know, 9 in 10, I think it's around 50% of parents saying that the kids pretty much drive the decision entirely to retain an SVOD service. Kids are playing a huge role when people start to make value-based decisions on which subscription service they'll continue to subscribe to. We expect households in the next 2 years to consolidate services and start looking for bundles, aggregators, and other ways to serve multiple channels, multiple IP as affordable as possible. The second thing there is we didn't look at PVOD during as part of this study. So despite knowing how successful Trolls World Tour was, we didn't look at that in detail. And in the UK here, we're going to be opening open air cinemas and drive-through cinemas soon. So once people have found out where they actually are, we expect cinema viewing to start to happen again. But it's clear for the time being that strategies for launching blockbuster movies and blockbuster IP, and we'll need to find a new space to build and monetize audiences. We saw families with Trolls turn it into an experiential experience, a cinema night at home with the whole family, popcorn, tickets, fancy drinks, you know, really starting to build in, you know, an experience, a home cinema experience. And interestingly, of course, that's not unlike VHS and Blockbuster and the time of DVDs when we all went out and had a night in together. So that will start to impact on how content is created. moving away necessarily from thinking about how do we make the perfect content for a big screen, to how do we make a content experience for a 50-inch screen, and also how do we start to package that content into an experience. So, looking at bundles and boxes that can be sent home that actually allow the family to get the full experience that they would do out of something like Trolls World Tour they would at home. Finally, we've been speaking to families at home. I know there's been a few questions around educational content and learning content. Parents are spending a lot more time at home, mums and dads, with their children in tight confines. It has its challenges, but parents are becoming increasingly aware of the implications of their parenting and their parenting choices, especially with more video being consumed. So high tempo shows with lots of action, especially those that age up kids' content choices and make their kids more lively, make life harder for parents. They make their kids more active, they make them bounce off the walls more, they make bedtime routines more difficult. Parents didn't used to see that because it happened at school with their friends. Now it's happening at home and parents are explicitly aware of it. So we're starting to hear parents talk more and more about appropriate content. And that's starting to have increasing influence on the media that they support their kids viewing. Blaze is something that is frequently mentioned at homes at the moment, with parents happy working in the room, listening to their children shout out answers. But we're definitely seeing parents start to think about content that is designed for their kid, which is great news for the children's media world. When we have I'm sure a world full of people viewing this who make kids content because they love making kids content, and carefully research and consider the needs of their audiences, that we expect to become more important in the way that families choose content, and also in the way that we should be making and distributing content. So the final slide before we go on to questions, what's next? Jay, having stepped out of the world of broadcasters into the world of agency, isn't stopping with SVOD. His next move is two things. I think this answers one of the questions, is doing that SVOD study in more and more countries. We've got the UK and the US so far, but also starting to look at AVOD platforms as well. So starting to look at ad-funded platforms, free VOD and PVOD as well. So this study will be expanding into new VOD areas in the near future. And we'll be looking across Europe and LATAM and Asian markets as well. So that's it. So I'm happy to take questions. Jay and I are both still here. I know we're running a little bit behind, but
thank you both so much. We have had lots of questions while you guys have been doing your presentation, which is hot off the press. So thank you so much for that. Viola Gabrielli says, hi Jay, do you also have data on how children of other countries consume content on SVOD?
So this study is a UK and US one only. The appetite was there for us to push this out and potentially sometime in the future, but currently no, this is just a UK and US study for the time being.
Thank you. And Richard Johnson asks, do we know what the breakdown of phone, tablet, laptop, desktop, TV as viewing device?
So we have the data, but I mean, because we only got it on Wednesday and we tried to keep this as succinct and compact a presentation for today as possible, that was one of the things that we decided to keep out of this version. But the study has the data. We'd love to share it at some point, but unfortunately not today.
Okay, thank you. And to Shabnam, apologies, Shabnam. I know you are a lady, so sorry about that. You are asking and basically saying, first of all, thanks for the presentation today. My question for Jay and Pete, she says, is if this is a UK data, where are all the public SVODs for kids? In the US, we have things like PBS Kids, and Canada, we have TVO Kids, Knowledge, and CBC Gem. What, or rather, where is that comparison?
So yeah, you're right. It is super important to have these things a part of it, and they are a part of the survey questions that we asked. So we do have the data, but again, in terms of keeping it succinct, we decided not to keep it on. We've got the data on a platform level only though. So because it's this survey and we're asking children questions, and there's hundreds and hundreds of TV shows already out there, we didn't really want to open that particular floodgate and have another 1,000 other shows that we need to ask about. So we wanted to keep it as SVOD as possible. But then in terms of platform comparisons, we do have those available, so we can share those after.
Thank you.
The charts are with me. I've created them. I've just omitted them from this version of the deck.
Okay, we appreciate that. Thank you. We're going to have our last question now, but I must say again, we have got the Face group chat, which is going to be continuing. And our last question is Alex Washington, two-parter. Does Amazon, in your opinion, do enough to market their kids' content? So it's a three-parter. Will more live action projects need to have multiple streams of income, books, clothes, products, etc., to be greenlit? And finally, in your opinion, do you feel Quibi is or rather has the opportunity to venture into kids' space and be successful?
I'll do the quick answers in that order. No, yes, maybe. So in terms of Amazon, as Jay showed throughout that, Disney Plus and Netflix at the moment are the ones doing the most in terms of global distribution to serve their kids. So Amazon Prime is falling behind that. It's still really popular with kids and families. It's just not as popular as those two. And obviously with Peacock and new services coming to market as well, it'll be interesting to see the impact that has on platforms like Amazon Prime. In terms of live action, absolutely. I mean, I think right now, brands and IPs that are being launched have to have in mind that, the monetization of children's IP is fragmented massively. So having multiple strands to be able to kind of stand your brand upon is critical. So thinking about kind of CP strategies, apparel strategies, as Jay said, with the older kids, you never see everyone wearing Stranger Things t-shirts. That is a really important factor in terms of longevity, and also making sure that people actually see your brand. So, if the media world is fragmented, there's less eyeballs, and therefore you want people walking around with a t-shirt because you need as many prompts as possible to remind people to come back in and engage. Quibi, it's still so early to know because it's still so early for them. The format for me feels really, really, really interesting for the kids space, but it's such a busy space, it's such a complex space, and Quibi just feels so early right now to be able to pass a thorough judgment. But if you asked me, as someone who's been researching the kids space for a long time, do I think like the structure and format of a product like Quibi would be engaging to at least some children? I would say it would be, but it's still early in the day.
Thank you so much, Jay, Peter. Thank you also, Richard, for taking part in our webinar today. It's been really, really active. Thank you so much for answering all of those questions. It's been great to have you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Brilliant stuff. So we're going to close today with some CMC style inspiration from the latest of our change makers. All young people who are achieving, influencing and making waves. We'd also like to take this opportunity to thank our Changemaker Strand sponsor, BAFTA. BAFTA are delighted to sponsor CMC's Changemaker Strand. It resonates with BAFTA's programme of events and initiatives that support and develop new talent and offer unique access to some of the world's most inspiring people working in the industry. So we have Avi Kalute, who has won a Diana Award and was named as One to Watch in the Every Woman Technology Awards this year. She's 12, she's the founder of Girls into Coding and is a passionate advocate for engaging girls with STEM, running local and wide workshops on coding and building robots. Let's hear from her now.
Hi, I'm Avi and I'm 12 years old and I'm the founder of Girls into Coding, and our mission is to try and get more girls and young women enthused about working with coding and technology. When I was 7 years old, I went to a workshop, and that workshop introduced me to the microbit and Scratch, and I really enjoyed it personally. And then from then I got given an opportunity to run a workshop, and thankfully I took it, and that's how I've started running workshops. And through running workshops, I noticed that the majority of the people who were attending were boys, and that gave me the idea to start up Girls into Coding, where we would invite more girls and give them an opportunity to explore coding and STEM. When I was 7 years old, I was kind of watching TV, but not a lot, and I really enjoyed playing with Lego, and that's kind of where I developed that interest for building and basically playing around with different pieces of card, paper, glue, and all that kind of stuff. My mum and dad, they both really like tech, and I think that when they were younger, they didn't have that opportunity to explore it like I'm doing now, and I think that they wanted me to kind of get that experience to see if I liked it or not by inviting me along to a tech event. And that's what brought me to really like physical computing, coding and technology. I think it's important that more girls get involved in coding and STEM because girls and women are underrepresented in STEM, and I think it's time that we really start working on fixing that imbalance, not just because it's like the right thing to do and not just because girls deserve the same opportunities, but as well as that the world needs science and technology even more. And I think it's really important that girls get involved because they need to know that it's okay that they try things they haven't tried before, even if they might feel intimidated by it. I think the term, if you can't see it, you can't be it, could be true, which is why I think we need more role models who can show kids and girls especially that they can do whatever they want to do. So I think that term is quite correct and we need more role models. I think social media online and on TV is a really good way for young people to be inspired by role models. I would say that Twitter is definitely one of the biggest platforms that I use, but we also have an Instagram page, and on Instagram we tend to not only do videos but also lots of text-based things. So what I really enjoy and love about running workshops is being able to share my skills with others and being able to see the look on the attendees' face when they see their project or robot in action. And I think that it kind of makes me feel proud to know that I've helped someone to kind of gain a further interest and to make them feel good about themselves for completing the workshop. So I would say that yes, I do see myself as a role model and an influencer, and I like to use social media to really express that message and share my stories with others, and also to promote Girls into Coding for other girls who want to come along and have that interest in coding and STEM, so they know that there are other girls like them who are interested and they can come along and explore all those different opportunities. In the future, I would like to collaborate on tech and STEM projects with different organisations, and I would also like to run more events in order to reach more girls, and we're aiming to reach at least 1,000 girls a year. And I think that this is really important as we want to be able to reach as many girls as possible to give them all that same opportunity. So with the recent restrictions from lockdown, one of the things we've been doing is developing robotics kits which can be sent out to the girls so they can build code at home with the help of an online tutorial. And we believe that all girls should feel like empowered to be able to access different opportunities and to be able to learn how to code, develop their making skills and digital skills from home, regardless of where they come from. So we think it's really important that girls are still able to engage with others, girls like them who have that interest in coding and STEM, and making sure that they're not afraid to try new things, as well as still staying connected with the Girls into Coding community. What I would like to say to people who make media for kids is that make sure you show girls that there are others like them who do have an interest. And you don't have to be good at something or perfect straight away. You can do whatever you want.
Brilliant, absolutely brilliant stuff. So we have come to the end. Oh my goodness, we've had such a roller coaster today. It's been brilliant. Thank you for staying with us. I know we ran over a little bit, but thank you so much for staying with us. So I would like to thank all of you who sent your questions in, but with regards to what we've just seen, thank you to Kate Clifford, who is one of our Change Maker producers, and Vicky Brophy, who execs that series for CMC. So this is the webinar that will be reported in detail on the CMC website, and you'll be able to find our video right there, or on YouTube, or look at it for Sunday evening. It'll be all ready for you by then. So a massive thank you to all of our speakers and to our patron sponsors. Thank you to Abby and the teams who put this all together. You guys behind the scenes, thank you so much. And to all of you for joining us here, thank you. And don't forget to go to the CMC Facebook group. Yes, we're going to be gathering there. Just, it's just going to be like being in a bar. So bring your own drink if you're going to have a tipple. And look out for the event. It's called SVOD, the Producer Perspective. And if you're not a member of the group, then there will be someone responding very quickly to requests to join. The address for that is in the box right now. Thank you. And please do make a note of all the up and coming CMC events before you go. So thanks a lot, you guys. Take care and have a great weekend.